Oh, okay. I didn't try. I gotta try that again. Hey everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mighty Monday. This is your host, Mae Renfroe, and I hope you had a great weekend and a good Monday so far. And now I believe that it's going to get a whole lot better. So I have a very special guest on tonight, joining me, Tim Wilson, who was referred to me by his wife because he has a powerful testimony that he would like to share. It's a powerful story and a message of God's supernatural protection and rescue over him. So just a big welcome, Tim, to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here this evening and to share your story. I believe it's one that's gonna really resonate with a lot of people and something kind of for everybody. Um, that's just from God. So, welcome tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to be. I think you said I'm your first male guest, so
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
big honor for me. Thank you very much.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, because when your wife mentioned that you had a testimony, I thought, well, sounds good. That's what I'm all about here on Mighty Mondays. We have real people, real stories of what God's done in their lives. And so you have a good one. What you had when we had talked on the phone. So if you could just go ahead and introduce yourself a bit more and kind of get into your story, how you want to share it.
Great. Okay. Well, my name is Tim Wilson. I live in Northeast Texas, and I've been here much of my life. You can see it's been a long life. Uh,
Mhm.
That's only by the grace of God, because the story I'm about to tell you occurred 2 years ago. And by all rights, I should not be here today to tell the story, but God had a plan and He wanted me to have a story. In fact, I had 1 week exactly before this incident occurred. Uh, there were several people in my church that were giving testimonies, and I marveled at how wonderful some of those testimonies were, testimonies of deliverance and overcoming just insurmountable uh, issues. And I just commented to the Lord that night in my prayer, and I said, I've got a testimony that's important to me. It means something to me, but it's not powerful and it doesn't really mean anything to anybody else. So there's not really much point in me trying to tell my testimony. And we believers like to joke, be careful what you ask for. Well,
Yes, I've heard that.
so a week later, I had a quite a testimony, and so I'll get right into it. This was, as I said, a couple of years ago. We had a couple of years prior to that. It was 2020. We had a really bad snowstorm down here. You may be used to the kind of snow that we had
Up
up in
up
your
here.
area often,
Yeah,
but 20 inches, 20 to 25 inches of snow is pretty devastating for us, and our
yeah.
buildings are not built to equip it to handle it. And there was a barn on some family property that my grandfather had built, a very large old barn built out of very heavy materials. The barn was 60 feet long and 20 feet high, and the roof, because of the weight of the snow, the roof caved in. And unfortunately, that there was an antique tractor inside that barn,
Mhm.
and so I wanted to liberate that tractor from the barn, and it was roof was had caved in on it. So this was late September, and snow was long gone, and so I was out there. Unfortunately, it kind of spur of the moment. I hadn't really told anybody where I was going. I didn't tell my wife, and it's an area where cell phone there was no cell phone service. Our cell phone service is pretty spotty out there in rural East Texas, and
Mhm.
so I'd left
Mhm.
my cell phone in
Mhm.
my pickup because it was useless there anyway. And I was taking tin off the side of the barn so I could get into that tractor and get it out.
Mhm.
Now, one side of the barn was pretty safe, but over on the north side, I knew it was very dangerous over there, and I had not intended to be. But we guys, we tend to do things that we know aren't maybe the smartest thing to do at the time. And I just got caught up in the moment, and I'd gone around the corner and I was pulling screws out of this tin, and there was this little igloo Playmate cooler had set on the ground, and I was pulling screws out and tossing them in that cooler. And I like to say I found the screw that was holding the whole barn up, because when I pulled this one screw out, I heard this pop, this loud pop, and I said, something bad is about to happen. I don't recall exactly what happened in the next millisecond, but evidently I tried to run and escape. I didn't get far enough, and the entire wall came down on top of me. Now, this wall is 18 feet high and 60 feet long, and as it came
My
down, the roof
goodness.
section came down on top of that. So, literally, there is the weight of a bus that came down on top of me. Now, to make matters worse, it didn't knock me over, but it came down with such force, hit me on the head, and came down with such force that it just pushed me down into a squat. So if you imagine a frog, if you will, sitting on the ground, and his front legs are like this, and his back legs are bent up
Mhm,
by his belly, and that's
mhm,
the position that I was in. My knees were up beside my rib cage, and my legs were pointed
mm,
out kind of behind me. My ankles were twisted, my feet pointed out, my heels dug into the dirt, and I was literally being crushed into the ground. It did not knock me out. Uh, I I remember everything. I remember feeling bones break when I went down, and I thought, well, I thought if my hip broke, and I thought, well, that didn't hurt as bad as I thought it would. Uh,
yeah.
but then once it settled on me, I'll go ahead and tell you, it was that little Playmate cooler that stopped the wall from literally just making a pancake out of me.
Mhm,
We retrieved that cooler later and measured it, and it
mhm.
was 9 inches tall. And so that's the space that I was in that position. I was in a 9 inch tall space. Uh,
Whew, you
it
can't
was,
even imagine.
it was,
That's unbelievable.
yeah. Well, I think about it today, and I can't imagine it either. I don't know how it was possible.
Yeah.
It was crushing the breath out of me. I could just barely get any air at all. By the way, there was caution tape all around this barn because it had collapsed, and so uh,
Mm,
there was plenty of
mhm,
warning for people not to be there, and so there wasn't
mhm,
much chance that anybody was going to just stumble upon me.
mhm,
But as I recognized my situation, um, I I immediately kind of took an assessment and recognized that I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't move anything but my forearms. I had a little bit of motion, little range of motion with my forearms, and I could move my head. I just kind of dug my chin through the dirt so I could look to one side and the other, but there was nothing. I was looking for something to grab a hold of that I could pull on, and that's when I found that cooler. I could barely touch it with my fingers, but there was nothing for me to try to pull myself with, and there was no way I could get my elbows underneath me to try to crawl. I tried to push with my back, and of course, the weight was far too much for me to be able to move. And so at this point, I started crying out to God, and I said, "Lord, please um, save me." Um, and I prayed for supernatural strength. You know, we hear these stories about
mhm.
people in car wrecks and uh, situations where they get supernatural strength and they're able to build vehicles.
Yeah.
And I pray that God would give me that kind of strength, but He didn't. I pleaded and I prayed. I cried out, Jesus, help me, give me strength, send angels, send some big angels to come lift this thing off of me and get me out. And
Oh,
but nothing happened. Um, and so um, I just kind of laid there for a moment, and I remembered that just before I pulled that last screw out, I remember hearing that still small voice in my heart that said, "Don't do that."
Mm.
And uh, that's one of the lessons. In fact, I'm going to tell you right now, uh, since this has happened, God keeps giving me lessons, telling me lessons from this incident. I've taken dozens and dozens of pages of notes of all these lessons. So I
Mhm.
think the best way for me to share some of them is to share them along the way. And that first lesson
Mhm.
was that we should always, always be in communication with the Holy Spirit. He's just longing to talk to us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the enemy of our soul is looking for opportunities
Mhm.
whenever we let our guard down. Those are the opportunities that he has to move in. And so we just need to always be in communication with him and always willing to listen to him. At that moment, he spoke to me and I did not listen. And so
Mm.
um,
Wow.
I was lying there crying out to God. Nothing happened. And I began to get a little desperate. You know that
Mhm.
there are it, it, there are times, especially those desperate times, that we really need to reach out. We have to reach out beyond what is within our grasp. So I was lying there trying to find something to grab a hold of to rescue myself. All the while, I think God was probably saying, "You're not going to rescue yourself, Tim. You're going to have to depend upon me." Well, nothing happened. I pleaded that he would move me. I pleaded that he would
Mhm.
move the building. I
Mhm.
pleaded that he would release me from the grip of this tomb, and that's what it was becoming, a tomb, but nothing happened. And so there alone with my thoughts, I remembered a promise that he gave me. He gave all of us. He said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." He gave that promise to Moses.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
while
Mhm.
Moses was leading the Israelites through the wilderness. And he promised, he said, "I'll never leave you nor forsake you." And I cried out and I said, "God, you promised you would not leave me. You gave me that promise." And still, nothing
Mhm.
happened. So
Mhm.
I gave up the effort to escape. The situation was obviously very hopeless. And it was pretty obvious that God was not going to deliver me. And this place was going to be my grave. Several people have asked me at this point, "Weren't you afraid? Weren't you scared?" I would be claustrophobic. I would be panicked.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
I want to tell you something. When you call on God to give you strength, he will give you strength. I was asking for physical strength, and all the while, he was giving me spiritual strength. He was giving me the
Mm.
strength to endure
Yeah.
what
Perseverance.
would have been fear, to persevere. Yeah, through that.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
said, "I will keep you in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on me." And so God gave me courage at that moment. He gave me the courage to trust in him and to not fear. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's nothing in this man that's fearless
Mhm.
except what God has put
Mhm.
inside.
Mhm.
So the Bible also says perfect love casts out all fear. Well, I like to liken that feeling, and I told you this the other day when we talked on the phone.
Mhm.
I equate it to anybody who's ever had an operation. You've been in the operating room, and they wheel you into that OR. They've got you all prepped, and it is cold in there. And I'm a cold natured person, and I'm just lying there shivering. And I've been through that a couple of times, and they bring this warm blanket and they cover you with that warm blanket. If you've ever been in that situation,
Mhm.
that warmth just
Mhm.
permeates your whole body, and it's the most wonderful, soothing feeling. And that's what God's peace is, even in desperate times like this. So,
Yeah.
in order,
Yeah.
so
Wow.
my lesson out of that is if you want to be fearless in situations that seem very fearful, you have to be prepared. You have to have the word of God in your heart and in your
Mm.
head. And so
Oh, wow.
that was very comforting to me, but I still wanted to know where God was because he
Yeah.
had, I kept calling on him to answer that prayer. He said, God, you had promised you would never leave me nor forsake me. So I cried out, God, where are you? I need you right now.
Mhm.
And Psalm 139 says, where shall I go from your spirit? If I ascend to the heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there.
Mhm.
And yet I didn't feel him. I didn't know that he was there. By the way, Sheol translates into the word or into the abode of the dead and is
Mhm.
derived from the word hollow. And that's exactly how I felt at that moment. I felt
Yeah.
hollow. There was no presence of God.
Yeah.
And prayed. I started praying every prayer I could think of. I prayed Psalm 23 was probably the first verse I learned when I was a little boy in Sunday school.
Mhm.
And I said, though I
Mhm.
walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And in that, my heart was content. I knew where I was going. I knew I wasn't going to hell. I knew I was going to heaven. I was going to be with
Mhm.
my Savior, and I was content. And I wish everybody could know that kind of contentment when you're in a desperate situation. Well, as I laid there, assessing my situation, struggling for air, wondering why God wasn't there with me, I recognized that's probably how Jesus felt on the cross.
Mhm.
You know, he felt total abandonment from God, from the Father, because he was bearing the weight of all the sins of the world and he was totally abandoned by the Father. And he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And and I thought at that moment, I never really understood how he felt. And now in just this small way, I think I do. I think I know what it's like for God to not be there when you need him. So time just kept passing and it it started getting pretty difficult. And I said, God, I know where I'm going. I know that this is your choice. This is where I die, and I'm good with that. I'm content with that. I know where I'm going,
Mhm.
but right now, it's going to be a long, slow, agonizing death, and it hurts. And it's hurting worse by the minute. I said, I'm just going to go crazy. I'm going to lose my mind if you don't give me something. I've asked you to remove me from this situation in your wisdom. You have chosen not to do that. So if I'm going to die here, I said, Lord, please give me some wisdom. Give me something to do to keep my mind off the situation, something to keep me from going crazy. If you've ever been in a situation where you're desperate for God and it feels like he's not there, like he's not answering, I want to tell you that God speaks very, very clearly in the stillness of our desperation.
Oh,
That's when he can get our attention. That's
yeah.
when I finally gave up trying to rescue myself, trying to do this my way. My way wouldn't work. God had a different way. In fact, God had a better way. God speaks to us through the
Mhm.
quiet, through the stillness of our desperation. And he
Oh,
spoke to me in that moment. He spoke to my spirit and he said, 3 profound words. He said, use your thumbs. I'm going to let that soak in for a minute.
Yeah.
And I thought about that and I said, my thumbs? Come on, you're God. You,
Yeah.
you can send legions of angels. You can send somebody with a backhoe. You can lift this thing off of me. That's all you've got? And he said, that's all you need. Use your thumbs. You know, every journey that we take begins with one small step.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just 3 days before this incident in Sunday school, we were talking about Moses in Exodus chapter 14. And we were discussing how desperate he was when he stood on they had made their escape from Egypt. He had led them up to the sea, and they were cornered like rats, and Pharaoh's army was coming after them, and they were all accusing him of leading them out there to kill them, to get them killed. And Moses stepped away by himself, and he stood by the sea, and he said, God, what do you want me to do? And God said, why are you crying out to me? He said, just take that staff I gave you and raise it up against the sea and part it. Now, that had never happened before.
Mhm.
Moses didn't know what was going to happen, but he
Mhm.
did what God told him to do. And basically, God just said, do something. Just take what I've given you and do something with it, and I will bless the effort.
Mhm.
And so I said, okay, you said use my thumbs, I'll use my thumbs. And so I was able to move my left arm and get my hand down beside my knee, and just the very tip of my thumb, with the very tip of my thumb, I was able to get to the dirt by my knee, and I pushed it and I pushed dirt and I kept pushing dirt. I was trying to scrape the dirt from under my knee, and it was hard like a rock. And I'll tell you, I worked and worked, and I had to stop and rest. And I don't know how long I was doing this, but I kept scraping dirt and nothing was happening. And after a great deal of time, I just relaxed to try to get some air back in my lungs. And I said, okay, God, that was fun. Now what do I do? And he said, use your other
Mhm.
thumb. And I said, and at that moment, I realized he had answered my prayer, because I'd asked him to give me something to do to keep me from going crazy. And I was so intent on trying to
Yeah.
dig with my thumbs that I wasn't thinking about my situation, and I wasn't thinking about the pain. And I said, hey, this is pretty good. I can do this. And so I moved my other thumb down there to my right knee, and just the very tip of my thumb, I started working the dirt, and the dirt was a little softer there, and I could actually dig. And so pretty soon, instead of just, I was getting a thimbleful of dirt out of the way, and then a little more, and using the whole, that much of my thumb and pushing dirt away.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, this is progress. I don't know what it's going to do, what good it's going to do, but it's progress. I'm doing something. And then I hit a root about this big around, and
Mm.
my progress stopped abruptly.
Mm.
And I said, okay, Lord, now what do I do? And he said, Tim, he said, the roots under there are what are holding you back from the freedom that you seek. And those roots represent the things that hold you back from me. They are the things that are keeping us apart and keeping you from the freedom that I
Mhm.
have for you.
Mhm.
And he named those roots. There
Mhm.
were actually, I counted 7. There were 7 roots that I had to dig through. The first of those roots was pride. And as I was digging the dirt from around that root so I could move it, I had to think about my pride and how, well, we all have to deal with pride, don't we? The
Mhm.
next root was selfishness. After I got that first root pushed out of the way, then I encountered another root. And he said, that one is selfishness. And so I had to pray about that and consider that as I dug around selfishness. And the third one was stubbornness.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, so he dealt with me in a very personal way with each one of these.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth
Yeah.
one was unforgiveness. And I said, Lord, I know what you're talking about, and I have forgiven. That was a long time ago, and I dealt with it for a long time, but I know I have forgiven. And he said, dig a little deeper. So I
Mm-hmm.
dug underneath that one and then encountered another root. And he said, that root is bitterness. He said, you cannot forgive as long as you hold bitterness in your heart. And I said, you're right.
Wow, wasn't that something? Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
had to dig around each one of these roots to move them. And I had to repent of each one of these sins. And finally, the last root he called self-doubt. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
why do you doubt yourself? You have all the creative power of the universe right in your fingertips. In this case, your thumb tips. Why do you doubt yourself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to throw in another lesson in here. Zechariah 4:10 says, do not despise small beginnings. See, the Lord rejoices to see the work done.
Yeah.
Begun, I should say. That's what the verse says. The Lord rejoices to see the work begun. It's not the thing that matters. It's the God that matters. It's the God that's the thing is little, but
Good.
the God is big. Our God is big.
Mm.
And he's
Yeah.
not against us, he's for us.
Mm-hmm. Wow. But yet we doubt, right? Yeah.
So after digging under those roots, I'd moved a lot of dirt and I'd moved a lot of roots. I started to take my hand and I put it down on my knee and push. And I would dig some dirt and I'd push on my knee, and I would dig some dirt and I would push on my knee, and eventually the knee started moving. And so I got a little more motivated and I would dig some more, and the knee moved a little more, and over some unknown period of time, um, I was able to straighten my leg out. And when I did, when that leg straightened out, I could just feel the rush of blood going back to my lower extremities. And but something miraculous happened with that, because my body mass shifted a little bit and it gave me a little more room. And so with that, the next thing that happened, I can't explain. I can only tell you what happened.
Okay.
And I've had to think about this for a long time to try to figure it out. And the only explanation is that angels came down there and grabbed me and pulled me out. As I told you the other day, I think about an earthworm. You know, earthworms don't have legs, they don't have
Mm-hmm.
arms, but they have these concentric muscles around their body, and they crawl with those muscles. Well, I don't have those kind of muscles, but I can tell you I crawled out of there like an earthworm. It was just sheer force of will that compelled me forward
Mm-hmm.
after I had a little bit of space, and a centimeter at a time, I was able to just move forward, and as my left leg, I moved far enough for my left leg to straighten out. Then it was an inch at a time. Now I'm in pretty much total darkness down here, but I can see to my left. I can see where the wall where had been standing before, where the wall was standing up on an 18-inch concrete foundation. So the wall was up 18 inches there, where I was in 9 inches over here, and I could see a tunnel of light where that foundation was, and I was reminded of most near-death experiences. You know, they always say they're compelled to the light, to the tunnel of light, and that's all I could see was that light. And so I just made my way toward the light, and the closer I got, the brighter the light became. And once I got to the foundation, I was able to get my elbows underneath and crawl out from under that wall. I was able to crawl out of that tomb. Um,
Wow. But you didn't know
extraordinarily.
you were going to get out.
Mm,
You didn't know
you're
you were
breaking
going
up
to get
there.
out.
I had completely given up on getting out. And, I think if I had kept trying to get out, I probably would not have. But it was not until I quit trying to do it my way and I allowed God to have his way with me that I was able to escape. A lot of people have proclaimed that it wasn't my time, that God's not done with me yet, or that he must have some big plan for me to accomplish. And before this happened to me, I would have been one of those people who would have said the same thing. But when I was in the hospital recovering from, miraculously, I had 2 broken legs, and a fractured vertebra, but no internal injuries whatsoever. And there's no explanation for that other than but God.
Yeah.
A friend came to visit me and he gave me a book, and there was a statement in that book that said, what if the big plan that God has for us is to stop trying to figure out what's the big plan that God has for us? What if all he wants us to do is what he told us to do 2,000 years ago? John 13:34, he said, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And I will tell you, I have a new perspective of love. I have a new perspective of life. Every love in my life is very, very important to me. This morning, um, I said goodbye to my childhood best friend. We buried my best friend this morning, and
Sorry.
I recognized all of the talents and skills that Randy had were because he had such a big heart, because he loved so deeply. He loved people and he loved everything about life that God gave him. And I hope that your listeners don't have to have a barn fall on them to recognize how easy it is to just sit back and love people and love what God has given you and love every moment of life, because it's worth cherishing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
One other thing, when let's say I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and um, I was in a rehab hospital after I got out of the emergency room hospital. They put me in a rehab hospital so I could learn how to function without the use of my legs. And so I was in a bed, and some of your listeners may know what this is like. Is in a little gurney bed size, or hospital sized bed, and they have alarms on this bed because I was not allowed to put weight on my legs, my broken legs. So I had alarms on this bed, and if I were to put an arm or a leg over the side of this bed, the alarms would go off, and you'd think SWAT team was coming in the room, because they would not allow my feet to touch the ground. So by the second or third night in this bed, I had a visitation, and it was not a pleasant visitation, May. Those of you who are listening, if you've ever had a visitation from an evil spirit, it's a horrible thing. I did not know what it was like until that evening. And I could feel the presence in the room, and it was not a welcome presence. And all I knew that I wanted to do was to get up and run. I was
Mm.
so overwhelmed with that compulsion to get up and run. I said, I don't care about my legs. I don't care what happens. I have got to get out of this room.
Mhm.
And I knew that all I had to do was press that button, and a nurse would come in and give me some medication to help me sleep, to overcome the anxiety. And I've known a lot of people who have come out of situations like this, and they were hooked on drugs because of that. And I recognized at that moment how that happens. And I learned a whole lot more tolerance for that situation that I've had before. And so I was determined that I was not going to press that button. Well, I remembered that the day before, a dear friend from my church had sent a link to a YouTube video, and I had pulled it up, and it was 3 hours long, and I said, I don't have time or patience to listen to a 3 hour video, so I'll listen to it
Mhm.
another time. Well, at that moment, I felt that I knew I was supposed to open that up. And so I went into that, I opened it, and it was 3 hours of the most beautiful, peaceful, soothing music with prayers, one prayer after another over that music. And I started listening to that, and it gave me the ability to pray along with that speaker. And eventually, that spirit left the room
Okay.
and never came back,
Well, yeah.
never came back. So this was a video that was sent to my friend, and she saw it and said, oh, I bet Tim would like this. And so she sent it to me, and it was there just at the time that I needed it.
Yeah.
God is good, isn't he?
Yeah.
He is
Oh,
so
yeah.
faithful.
Yeah. Oh,
He is
I just
faithful if we just
like
give him
that.
the
Yeah.
opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Well, that's neat that you have found him faithful through your story and just unimaginable. I mean, what you went through under there, as you described before you started using your thumbs to do that and to get rescued. And I wonder if I could ask a couple of questions about how long did you find out that you had been under there? Like, how long was that from when it collapsed to when you did get out? And then, can you kind of tell about how you were found then and got the help, got to the hospital? Can you describe that too?
Um, to the best I can guess is I was under there for about 3 hours.
Three
And
hours.
once I got out, there was a house nearby, uh, and I knew that I knew the people that lived in it. I knew when they came home, they went straight into their house, and they would never have heard me. I see. I When I was under the wall, I didn't have much air. I cried out to God. I screamed as loud as I could, but there
Mhm.
wasn't. I mean, somebody could have been walking right beside me and never heard me. Um,
Mhm.
but when
I can imagine.
once I got out, I did not know if they had gotten home from work yet or not. But when I heard a vehicle door shut, by this time I had gotten enough air in my lungs. I laid there for a long time, maybe another hour. Uh,
Okay.
when
Once you got
when
out
when
from underneath.
when the neighbor, yeah, once I got out from under it, when the neighbor came home, and he heard me, and so he came over and found me, and called 911,
Okay.
and I got a helicopter ride to the hospital.
Yeah. Oh,
There's a little comical scene there when the EMTs showed up. Um, they looked at me, and at this time, all I knew was I had one broken leg. And so he looked at me and he said, and he looked at the barn. He said, "Did it fall on you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, so he pulled out his radio and he called for a helicopter. And I said, "Wait a minute, wait a minute." All I could think about was the cost of a helicopter ride. And I said, "Wait just a minute." I said, come on, a helicopter for a broken leg?" And he looked at me and he said, "Dude, a barn just fell on you. You've got a lot more going on than a broken leg." And I said, "Yeah, you're probably right. Bring the
Yeah.
helicopter."
Yeah. Wow.
But
That's neat and just it's just so amazing. Yeah, how you got it. So you were late there about an hour. I can imagine what a relief it must have been to have got maneuvered out, or you said the angels feel like really pulled you out, and you just laying there. You must be just like praising God. I can imagine what would
well,
be
there
going.
was. Do you have fire ants in Canada? I know you spent some
I'm
time down here
familiar in
in
Texas,
Texas,
though. Yeah,
so
because we have
you're
our home
very
in Texas.
familiar with fire ants. They're just
Yes.
vicious, stinging
Yeah.
ants, big red stinging ants.
Yeah.
There was a large bed of fire ants right near where I was lying when I got out, and so I had to crawl far enough to get away from get as far enough away from those ants as I could. And
Yeah.
I laid there and I thought, my cell phone is in the pickup in my pickup. And I thought for a moment I could probably crawl over there and I could probably pull myself up in the truck and get to my cell phone and maybe I could get out a text message to somebody. And then I remembered a friend of mine in high school who had uh, been in an accident as a senior in high school.
Mhm. Mhm.
He was in an accident and broke his back, and
Mhm.
he stood up and he walked about 3 steps and he collapsed. And those were the last 3 steps he ever walked. And I said, "You know what? I'm content to just lay here as long as if I have to
Mhm.
feed the fire ants, that's fine. Somebody's going to find me eventually." And so I decided I would just lay there, and I guess that was a good decision because I did have a fractured vertebra.
Mhm.
Um, you know, this is my story, and it's a story uh, that God gave me, and He has compelled me to tell this story. And so, may I want to thank you again for the opportunity to share this story with your viewers, with your audience, and with the people that I will refer to you to this blog as well. But it's my story, and
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
everybody has a story. I've been listening to some of the stories on your site, and
Oh, okay.
they're 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 much more devastating than mine.
Some have been.
But what
They've
I
had some
what I
hard
want
ones.
to
Yeah.
yeah, you've had some tough, and what I want to point out is I don't share this story because it's some great magnificent thing that happened. I share it because it's a story of how God got my attention and how he rescued me and how he proved himself faithful to his word and how he honored me because I trusted in him.
Yeah.
That's what I want people to know. And I want everybody to recognize that you all have a story. Everybody's got a story. Even if it doesn't seem like it's very powerful, it is. If you will just spend some time and let God reveal to you the lessons throughout it. As I said, there are lessons that still come to me 2 years later from this experience. If you will
Mhm.
allow God to
Mhm.
reveal to you those lessons, Jesus will reveal
Mhm.
himself to you and
Mhm.
he will reveal himself to others through your story if you will
Mhm.
tell it, if you will share it. That's why God gives us these stories. So don't hold it in your heart. Don't keep it to yourself, but share your testimony. Don't worry about how powerful it might be, that
Mhm.
somebody else is experiencing something worse. Share your testimony, please.
Yeah. You never know who can help. I mean, there's power in sharing the testimony, just as it says in the Bible. Um, Yeah, I had a thought there for a second. Um, oh yeah, but God wants us to do that searching, right? Kind of what can I learn from this? What do you have for me in this? And then that's kind of what you did when you was under, obviously the roof at the time. Things like you were something like communing with God and you're learning lessons. But after, I mean, I think that's what's important is to not wonder what, like, why me, but like what can I learn from this and how can I bring God glory in this, right? Is that kind of what you're saying and encouraging?
Exactly, exactly. That's why he gives us the experiences of our lives. And so when we uh, when we take the lessons from his word and we integrate those into our own lives, it becomes real. And when
Mhm,
it becomes real to us, real to our hearts, then we can share light and life
mhm,
and truth to other
mhm,
people. Uh,
mhm,
yeah, I was disappointed somewhat uh, in the graveside uh, this morning because I felt like the speaker was trying to frighten people
mm,
into a relationship with Jesus. And I'm telling you, nobody's gonna come to Jesus because they want to go to heaven or they want to live forever. Nobody's
mhm,
gonna come to Jesus because they're afraid of hell. They're gonna come to Jesus because they recognize how much he loves us and how much he is willing to do anything. When you realize the price that he paid, when you realize the agony of the cross, when you realize that he did that for me, he did it for everybody, but he did it for me too. I
mhm,
shared with
mhm,
you the other day, I have 13 grandchildren, and
mhm,
I like to tell them when I'm one on one with them, I'll say, you know, you're my favorite. Of all my grandchildren, you're my favorite. When I first started doing that, a couple of them got a little concerned about that. "Well, grandpa, you can't say that." And I said, "Well, yes, I can because right now you are my favorite." And that's the way it is. When the one that's with me, the one that I'm with, the one that I'm loving on at that moment,
mhm,
that's my favorite of all of them. That's the way God
mhm,
is with us.
mhm.
Only the cool thing about God is that he can be with every one of us at the same time. And so 24/7, I'm his favorite.
Yeah,
24/7, you are his favorite. 24/7, you are his favorite. He never, never turns his back on you because he
yeah,
loves you so much.
yeah.
That's why people are compelled to God, not
Yeah,
out of fear.
yeah, yeah,
So that's the message we need to share. We need to
yeah,
share God's love.
yeah, yeah. That's what's gonna draw them. Well, thanks so much
Mhm.
for sharing just that right now, but the whole your whole story, just for opening up and sharing that. And it really is a story of supernatural, God's protection and rescue and the perseverance, at that time and just leaning into God, Him giving you that perfect peace that describes in Isaiah 26:3. So yeah, thank you so much. Is there kind of
Mhm. Thank you.
anything last words you want to say before we close?
I I think I've given all 4 of my last words already.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. You have given us a lot. And yeah, I'm excited now for my family to watch this. It's done with you and
Alright.
my friends and sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for spending this time and
Thank you,
sharing.
May,
Take
very
care.
much.
Oh, bless.
Yeah.